welcome everybody. Good morning. Please sit down. And I am Nuncio, and I have pleasure to present this album and open the second day of International Symposium of Justice. Today, unfortunately, Professor Daley had a problem, and it wasn't able to attend our International Symposium, but we will start this morning with Professor Marcelo Araújo, the professor in Universidade do Estado de Rio de Janeiro, no Departamento de Direito, the Law, and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the Department of Philosophy. And the talk of the professor will be human rights and the reproductive freedom. The time is half an hour, and please, Professor, you can start.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to be here again in Florianópolis. Firstly, I'd like to thank Alessandro and all of the colleagues involved in the organization of the event. And one thing I promise you is that before you have the time to fall asleep, I'll have finished. So, it's a short paper, which I started earlier this year in Germany with a scholarship granted by the Humboldt Foundation. This year, we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This historical document has shaped the legal and moral landscape of our time, and for sure, we have every reason to celebrate its endurance. But there is yet another reason to celebrate. This year is also the 40th anniversary of the first IVF, in vitro fertilization. The first human being to be conceived outside of a woman's body was born in 1978. The connection between these two historical events may not be immediately apparent or philosophically relevant. But as I tend to show, technologies for the control of human reproduction have been of paramount importance for the implementation and enlargement of some basic rights. Technologies for the control of human reproduction have two important features. One, they have been originally developed for therapeutic purposes, but then later they have also been increasingly deployed for non-therapeutic purposes. And two, the non-therapeutic use of technologies for the control of human reproduction has been instrumental for the implementation and for the enlargement of two basic rights, namely the right to found a family and our reproductive rights. To say that some new technology is instrumental for the implementation of a right is not a problematic claim. I have, for instance, the right to visit a friend in a faraway country, but I need an airplane to take me there. The airplane is instrumental to the implementation of my right. The word enlargement, however, is ambiguous. Let me explain then in which sense new technologies for the control of human reproduction represent an enlargement of some basic rights, namely the right to found a family and our reproductive rights. We can say, for instance, that the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights represented an enlargement of human rights because it introduced new rights, namely social rights, which are rights that did not exist previous to the Declaration of Human Rights. Previous to the emergence of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, women did already have the wish, for instance, to have paid leave or leave with adequate social security benefits. But women could not yet claim that some human right was being violated whenever the wish to have paid leave was frustrated. They already knew what they wished, namely the benefits of paid leave, but what they wished could not have been claimed as a matter of right before the establishment of Article 10 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Social human rights give women the institutional power to require the fulfillment of wishes that they had prior to the existence of social rights. But social human rights did not enlarge the range of things that women might wish to claim as a matter of rights. In affirming that new technologies for human reproduction have provided an enlargement of some basic rights, I do not mean that new technologies give us new rights in the same way that the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights established some new rights, namely the rights that did not exist before. New technologies of human reproduction represent an enlargement of some basic rights to the extent that they enable us to claim the fulfillment of wishes that could not have been had before the emergence of these new technologies. I would like to explain this point further. The right to found a family is enshrined in Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This right is also protected by Article 12 of the European Convention of Human Rights, by the Article 23 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and by Article 16 of the Proclamation of Tehran of 1968. The right to found a family, as a matter of course, also implies the right to have children. In some legal documents, the right to have children is usually referred to as reproductive right. One document issued by the United Nations in 1994, for instance, establishes the connection between the human right to found a family and our reproductive rights in the following terms. Quote, "These rights, reproductive rights, rest on the recognition of the basic right of all couples and individuals to decide freely and responsibly the number, space and timing of their children, and to have the information and means to do so, and the right to attain the highest standard of sexual and reproductive health. It also includes the right to make decisions concerning reproduction free of discrimination, coercion, violence, as expressed in human rights documents," end quote. The human right to found a family and, by implication, the right to have children, as these rights have been stated in most international declarations of basic rights, originally remained silent as to the procedure one was supposed to employ in order to generate a child. And the reason for this is simple. There seemed to be only one basic procedure to generate a child and thus to found a family. The procedure is relatively well known and does not seem to require much explanation. Well, at least not among adults. We can at most expect, as the document just quoted requires, that the basic procedure will follow the highest standard of sexual and reproductive health. However, over the last few decades, new technologies of human reproduction have offered prospective parents ever more freedom to exert power over the basic procedure to the point of making it utterly unnecessary for the purpose of human reproduction. And as these technologies now continue to evolve rapidly, the human right to found a family seems gradually to make room for an even more fundamental right, namely reproductive rights. In the philosophical literature, the right to have children is also referred to as procreative liberty or reproductive freedom. I suggest that reproductive rights are now more fundamental than the human right to found a family because technologies of human reproduction have evolved faster than the ordinary use of language. From the point of view of individuals who resort to new technologies in the attempt to found a family, the most important thing is not so much to convince other people that a broader, more inclusive conception of family should be embraced. This might require more time than they actually have to generate a child and thus to found a family in line with their own understanding of what counts and what does not count as a family. The most important thing is rather to claim the basic right to have a child genetically related to them, whether or not the fulfillment of their wish to have a child of their own also amounts to founding a family is a matter of linguistic convention and legal interpretation. New technologies may, for instance, enable same-sex couples or single women to generate a child even if the word family may sometimes still sound inadequate to refer to the affective bonds, mutual duties and legal rights that will unite them as a group. Prior to the emergence of some new technologies for human reproduction, people did already have the wish to generate children and to found a family. This wish may be so strong and its implementation so fulfilling in the lives of many people that in the course of the 20th century, some declaration of rights have been established in order to empower men and women to be able to claim the fulfillment of this wish as a matter of right. But as technologies of human reproduction evolve, the meaning of words such as family and parenthood becomes blurred. The word reproduction, on the other hand, is less susceptible to social conventions and legal interpretation than words such as family and parenthood. Thus far, I have talked about technologies for the control of human reproduction in rather general terms. I would like to emphasize now that I have in mind here three particular techniques, namely 1, contraceptive pills, 2, the IVF, and 3, the PGD, that is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Beginning in the 60s, contraceptive pills give women the freedom to decide when, if at all, to conceive a child. Later, the emergence of the IVF procedure enabled men and women to generate children without having to resort to the old procedure, namely sexual intercourse. Both contraceptive pills and IVF were initially developed for therapeutic purposes, that is, as a means of treatment for a variety of issues that affect human reproduction. The contraceptive pill was originally developed as a means of treatment for menstrual disturbance. Its contraceptive power was perceived at first as the side effect of an otherwise promising medicine. The pharmaceutical industry then quickly realized that the alleged side effect of the drug might be harnessed to provide women with a new method of birth control. However, there was not at the time a broad consensus regarding the morality of pursuing birth control by means of biotechnology. Many people, and especially the Catholic Church, strongly opposed this practice. For this reason, the pill had to be licensed at first as a medicine, as there were no rules for the approval of a drug for healthy individuals. In the end, though, contraceptive pills give women an unprecedented control over the exercise of their reproductive rights. And few people today would still consider it morally wrong to use the pill for the sole purpose of birth control. Contraceptive pills give women a kind of autonomy that they did not possess before. The IVF, too, was initially employed as a means of treatment for infertility, which may affect both men and women. The IVF procedure, in combination with the PGD, allows prospective parents to know whether the fertilized egg carries some of the most common inherited diseases. If some inherited disorder is detected, the embryo is usually discarded. Depending on the local legislation, non-viable embryos and unclaimed frozen embryos may be used for the purpose of scientific research and then discarded. Even though contraceptive pills, the IVF and PGD emerged as a means of treatment for issues related to human reproduction, it is clear by now that these technologies have also been largely used for non-therapeutic purpose. Although contraceptive pills are pills, we do not usually think of them as a sort of medicine, for they are not meant to treat any diseases. Contraceptive pills are used to avoid pregnancy, which by no means could be referred to as a kind of illness. The IVF and PhD may indeed be used to detect a genetic disorder in the fertilized egg, but these technologies have not been used to treat any genetic disorder in the human embryos, but to avoid the birth of a genetically defective child in the first place. And although IVF and PhD may be used to address infertility issues, they have also been increasingly employed now to address problems that cannot be described as diseases. Consider, for example, the practice of oocyte cryopreservation, also known as egg freezing. A woman may decide, for example, to have some of her eggs retrieved and frozen during the early years of her adult life. This enables her to concentrate on her professional career while she is young, or while she takes the time to meet the partner with whom she really wants to have a child. Later, when she has secured the material means to give her child the best possible start in life, or met a suitable partner, one or more eggs may be fertilized. And the woman does not even have to have a partner for this. She may simply go online and choose a vial of semen from a private sperm bank and have it delivered to a fertility clinic. By the time the eggs are fertilized, the woman may be less fertile than she was earlier when the eggs were retrieved from her ovaries. But it does not mean that she has become ill later. The procedure, thus, is not used to treat an illness, but to enable women to implement their reproductive rights in ways that could not have been imagined when some of the most influential declarations of human rights were established. In the current literature on oocyte cryopreservation, it has become usual to distinguish medical egg freezing from social egg freezing. The former is deployed for medical reasons, when a woman has to undergo, for instance, cancer treatment, which may considerably reduce her chances of having a child after the treatment. Social egg freezing, on the other hand, is deployed for non-therapeutic reasons. The interest in egg freezing has significantly increased over the last years. In August 2017, for instance, the Anvisa, the Brazilian health regulatory agency, published a report revealing that between 2011 and 2016, the importation of human semen for IVF increased 2,625% in Brazil. There is a similar trend in other countries too. An increasing number of men and women worldwide are finding new ways to implement their reproductive rights thanks to the emergence of new technologies for human reproduction. But these technologies are not merely instrumental to the implementation of wishes and legitimate claims that men and women already had before these techniques emerged. Same-sex female couples, for instance, could not have had the wish to share a pregnancy before the development of IVF. That is, they could not have realistically imagined the possibility of having the egg of one partner fertilized in vitro by the semen of an anonymous donor and then transferring the egg into the womb of the other partner. They may have wished to become a mother and to found a family, but the idea of motherhood and family that a shared pregnancy entails could not have occurred to them before the emergence of new technologies for human reproduction. It's in this sense that I have defended here that new technologies for human reproduction have provided an enlargement of some basic rights. The technologies do not create new rights, but they are instrumental to the implementation of rights and enable individuals to think of parenthood and family in ways that did not exist before. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. We can open the debate and please. Mari. Thank you. Mari.
Thank you for your lecture, Marcelo. In this context, I'd like to ask you a question which I raised during the dinner yesterday.
Okay.
Because you explain much more, of course, we have more time today than during the dinner, that you didn't touch the problem of surrogate mothers. So I'd like to ask you about that, because do you think that surrogate mothers would do that job if they were not forced to do it, you know, like workers in mines, for example, if they have the choice to choose a different job, they would rather do something else than work in mines, because it's very unhealthy and so. And some surrogate mothers in India and other states do it because they are usually poor and so on, and they do it for women from Western countries and so on. So I understand that in some conditions it's the better choice to do it than other choices when surrogate mothers otherwise would be in really very poor conditions and so on. So, but still, my question is if it's just if it's still exploitation.
Thank you for the question. There is actually a whole range of new questions which derive from the emergence of new technologies for human reproduction, surrogate models. And now there is also this fascinating new technology called CRISPR-Cas9 that may possibly be used in the near future for the purpose of human reproduction too. And I think the problem related to surrogacy is a special chapter in this discussion. I think that it is possible that surrogacy may also be used to exploit the woman who will carry the baby. But on the other hand, I think it's also possible to think of some kind of regulation in order to avoid this kind of exploitation. This topic has been regulated in Brazil some time ago, quite recently actually. And in Brazil, for example, the surrogate mother cannot receive money, so it's not business. And the other thing is that the surrogate mother cannot say later, I am the mother, I want to keep the baby. It's a matter of regulation now, it cannot happen. What happens though, thanks to the emergence of these new technologies, is that the regulation can be very different from country to country. So it means there is a whole new market now for genetic tourism. That is, if you can't have a procedure in your country, you can easily go to Buenos Aires, the US, or wherever, the procedure is allowed, and have the procedure performed. I think it's a reason to think of a global strategies to think of regulations for these technologies. But as I said, I think it's a specific chapter, surrogacy, in this discussion. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful lecture, and you know, as we discussed yesterday, it is really a hot and very intensely debated topic. I understand that this the whole issue raises new questions connected mainly to commodification and marketization. I know that it's another discussion perhaps, but I would like to ask you one thing. You were talking about enlargement of reproductive rights by way of using reproductive technologies. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about the opposite direction, that in fact these new technologies are also in a way shrinking our social idea about what does it mean, the right to found a family. Feminist theories raises this distinction between biological parenthood and social parenthood, Sarah Rudik, for example. And this was actually also seen as an emancipatory move for women, not to put the sole emphasis on biological reproduction, but to allow wider ranges of options how to create a family, we consider family of some adult members and children. But this direction, this new technologies goes the opposite direction, and even though these two options are not exclusive, we can imagine both, there is some social pressure towards this biological reproduction as the true meaning of being a parent and found a family. So, how would you relate these two trends, enlargement and shrinking?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think I see the point. Firstly, I proposed that this technologies provided an enlargement of human rights, not of reproductive rights. That was the point. And the argument is quite simple and straightforward. The idea is that we have the right to found a family as a matter of human rights, but then there is the question, what's exactly a family? And this has become a pressing question after the emergence of these new technologies, because some people will say, two women, as a lesbian couple, they cannot, if they have a child of their own, or adoption or through this technology, it doesn't count as a family. Or two men, if they have a child, it doesn't count as a family. What I have proposed is that for the people who want to found a family, it's not so important that the other people regard them as a family. The most important and pressing question is having access to these new technologies. Whether or not it now counts as a family, namely two women and a child, it's a matter of legal interpretation and social convention. All these concepts, the meaning of these concepts change throughout time, and maybe in the long run there will be another conception of family, more inclusive. But for now, I think people who want to resort to this kind of technology, they want to claim, in the first place, the right to have a child of their own, genetically related to them, and to found a family according to their own ideal of what a family is. But then I see the point, there is also another question, if the technology might not, on the other hand, generate a kind of pressure. Yes, I think it may generate a kind of pressure. That is, women, on the one hand, they have now a chance of to work longer in their career, not to think of having a child very early in their adult life. They can postpone pregnancy, and I think it's a kind of empowerment. I think it's a kind of improvement and enhancement of the autonomy. But I see the point. This point cannot be avoided. The point is, well, but then there will be also the pressure that for the market, that they postpone the pregnancy and that produce more and that they keep working for more time. I think it's possible to think of this kind of pressure, but not giving them access to these technologies wouldn't make things better for them. That's generally how I think. Hands together.
Yeah, Professor.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have one question. The relation between human rights and reductive technologies, because I would say the first addressees of duties that come out from human rights are the state and the states. So it seems to me that even if they are using in the Human Rights Declaration and the Covenants specific content formulations like family and so, they do not define in this what a family is. It's open for cultural change. Therefore, I think, and also it is open for possibilities of action you use to produce your health, to take care of your health, and so on. So I think it is not so that we have new human rights. I mean, the states have the duty to take care that these rights are protected, and even if you have conflicts between different human rights, that's a normal case, then the state have to offer a procedure to decide what is first and what is second, and also to decide who pays for it. So if you say this new anti-baby treatment is not a medicine, so therefore why should the society pay for it, not the person in itself? And so I think that is just a normal cultural change, but not something that really affects human rights. And then I have another question. I mean, do you have moral arguments against this development of new technologies? To a certain extent, one can have strong cultural, or let's say religious arguments. They say, oh, we don't want this kind of change, because there's a loss in specific ways of dealing, let's say, for instance, with pregnancy. So in Germany there was a research, and that shows very clearly, it was, I think, 10 years ago, that in former times, to be pregnant means you are in a situation for hope. So for the woman and for the others, and surprise, surprise, and things like that. And then nowadays, with all these techniques and medical take care, it's a situation of care, of be controlled and control yourself. So there's a loss of this traditional, let's say, romantic understanding. But that had nothing to do with human rights. I mean, maybe you can say that it's a pity, but it's not immoral.
Okay, thank you. I see 2 points here. I did not defend that new rights have been created by these technologies. I have rather proposed that these technologies allow the emergence of an enlargement of rights. Then I tried to make sense of alignment. What I have proposed is that the basic right at the issue here is the right to found a family. And what happens now is that people have thinking of founding a family, and they have always wished to have to found a family, and thanks to the Declaration of Human Rights, this fulfillment of this wish was granted as a matter of human rights. But at the beginning, I think it was not an issue to define a family. There was, I think, a common understanding of what a family amounts to. But thanks to these new technologies, we have to think now of new conceptions of a family, and there is no consensus whether or not these new kinds of social unities do count as family. And what happens now is that this is the sense in which I proposed an enlargement of human rights, that we have ways of thinking of family founding which could not have been even imagined for, like, for example, shared pregnancy, 2 women, the egg of one woman is implanted into the womb of the other woman and fertilized, first fertilized and then transferred to the womb through IVF. But this idea could not have been realistically imagined, conceived before. This is the idea. This is in this sense I proposed the idea of an enlargement, not of new rights, but new ways of exerting these rights. The other point that I did not address here, but I also consider a very important point, it's still unclear whether the existence of basic reproductive rights also entail the duty of the state to provide the means of fulfilling these rights. I think this is not a special problem. Social rights are expensive. Holidays, paid leave, unemployment, security, all the things cost money. And it will depend from country to country whether or not they are in a position to provide there's benefits. In the UK, for example, I think they pay for 1 or 3 cycles. If it doesn't work, I'm sorry, it didn't work, but we tried to. So I think it can be regulated too, and in the long run, maybe I'm too optimistic, the technology may become increasingly cheaper, and at some point we'll think that it's a duty of the state to provide the means for fulfillment of this right. But this is not the point I wanted to address here for the time being. Thank you.
Marcelo, thank you very much. I like it very much. I have a question. I am very sympathetic actually with these technologies and also with your argumentation, but I have one point. Let's start from the example with the flight. You know, I have the right to visit a friend, now there is an airport. Well, when I say I have the right to visit a friend, I'm stating this as a negative right. That means nobody can stop me from doing this. Not that I have a right that people give me the possibility to go there. So, okay, there is an airplane, I can do it, but I can doesn't mean that I have the right to. So now the question to the technologies, you know, when you say we have a right to found a family, just this, then it means nobody can stop you. Or maybe nobody can force you, but in any case it is more a negative right. Now when you introduce the idea that, and to have access to the technologies, the question is now a positive right, like the state should positively give you access, or it's still a negative right. Nobody can stop you from having access to this. So this is the first question. Is it negative or a positive right? How should we understand it? Secondly, the fact that I have technologies that allow me doing things that were unthinkable till yesterday represent really an enlargement of my autonomy. I would say it represents an enlargement of my possibilities of acting. But then, if you say, no, this is about autonomy, then I would like to know what kind of autonomy are we talking about? How do you define autonomy first? And secondly, is necessarily any new possibility that arises for me an object of a possible right? I mean, the fact that I can do new things, does it mean that I have a right for this because it will enlarge my autonomy? That's why I would like to hear more about this concept of autonomy you're working with.
Okay, thank you. The questions are a bit related to this topic. Well, I have a right to visit a friend in another country. This is a tricky right because it also depends on being accepted in other countries. We could think I have the right to visit a friend in my country, in the rainforest, for example, but I needed the technology to take me there. And then you asked, okay, but does it mean we have the duty to give you the means to fulfill your right? I would say it's a problem for social rights, generally speaking. I think it would be rather cruel to say, okay, you have the right to go to and throughout your country, but you have no duty to provide you with the means to. I think, let's suppose you have the right to vote for president, but you live far away. I think it would be rather cruel to say, it's your problem that you live so far away, will not give you a bus to go to the ballot on that day. I think we have accommodated this demand. I think we have become sort of, we have understood that this is not simply a negative right. The real fulfillment of this right will depend on a certain degree of our giving you the means to fulfill the right. Namely, you have free access, for example, to the bus on the election day, for example. So you have to give you. But if you accept that, I think you can also think in the same way as regards reproductive rights. It's not simply a negative right. No one, that's what we propose. No one is telling you can't found a family. Like in China, for example, for a long time. You have the right, but I think there is an analogy here. There is the right, and now I understand it's all right to have a family, to found a family, let's suppose a gay couple, and I think it would be also rather cruel not to provide the means for the fulfillment of this right, simply by saying, no, it's just a negative right, you don't have any duty to give you this right. But for sure, for now, these technologies are rather more expensive than buses. And this is now a matter of economy, how much money we have in order to give you. But this is something that has to be negotiated, but I wouldn't say in advance that the state has no duty. Gradually, we do provide more benefits. And the word autonomy, well, the word was mentioned once. Okay. So this is a very easy way not to answer it, because I try to rather to concentrate not so much on the idea of autonomy that these technologies have provided women with, even though I would make the point that it somehow enhanced their autonomy. But strategically, not to answer your question, I have rather concentrated on one specific human right, namely the right to found a family. And this right now has to be, we have to think again about the importance of this right now, thanks to the emergence of these new technologies. That was the point.
Please, Professor Baines.
Thank you. Just one question. I had several, but I'll keep it to one. As you know now, the question of reproductive rights in the United States is very much kind of under some suspicion, depending on our next Supreme Court appointments. And I want to make a point from my talk last night, once again, just to underscore the importance of this. Are we talking about liberty, or are we talking about equality? And one interpretation of reproductive rights is not in terms of enhancing liberty or autonomy, but securing equality for women. The denial of reproductive rights treats women unfairly in terms of burdens that it places on them about how they're, what happens to their body, about employment opportunities, delaying educational decisions, and so forth. So yes, it's certainly connected to questions about autonomy, but I think important here with Catherine McKinnon, the feminist legal theorist, it's much more important to see these reproductive rights as rights to secure equality for women rather than enhancement of their autonomy or liberty. Now, I don't know what impact that has with respect to the interpretation of the human right to have a family, but maybe one makes arguments for reproductive rights under just demands for equal respect for all persons. And you could run a whole argument about reproductive rights, I think, on those terms. It's another example of this. Are we talking about equality, or are we talking about liberty? Why is it that we prioritize liberty?
Thanks. I don't know if it's an objection to the point I have made, but it's certainly an important point to see the problem I have addressed in a new light. And I think it would allow me to resume the question posed by Susanna. Yes, this is a good point. Technologies for like IVF, they can be seen now as the contraceptive pills to give women this important power to enhance their equality. That is, they were now about 40 years ago in a position to work the market and to go to the university. There's some studies that show that after the introduction of the contraceptive pills, women could go to the college and stay there for a longer time. It was a kind of cognitive enhancement, not through the pill itself, but through the possibilities it gave women. And it provided, as you suggest, a kind of an enlargement or enhancement of quality of opportunities. And in like manner, I would say now we have technologies that sometimes are frowned upon in our time, in the same way that contraceptive pills were frowned upon. That is, some people think of them as a kind of further pressure upon women, but I would totally agree with you that rather than depriving them, women especially, of autonomy, it does create an environment for more equality of opportunities. I think it's a great point. Thanks. I do not think it was an objection to be answered. No. Thank you for the point.
I will show a photo that is it's my point. My point is that I'm not sure that we are talking about a right. I think that maybe we are talking about a kind of pressure and obligation that women have in our societies. And is a photo from a child that was born last month, and maybe some of us have seen this photo, but it's a baby surrounded with 1,600 shots and needles that was used for these women to have this baby. So it's more than around 33 shots per month for 4 years. So is a right to have a family, or is we are talking about something more than this? Because to have a family, we don't need to have a biological child. So it's only to put a point. I have a doubt that we're talking about a right when I see this kind of photo. It's only this.
Okay, thank you. One point I haven't addressed is adoption. Of course, you can also found a family through adoption. That's another option. Whether or not it's morally better to adopt a child rather than resorting to new technologies is another question I want to address here. Well, good for the child. If it was for the good of the child to have so many thousand shots of vaccines, I don't think it's a problem in the first place. If you are giving the child a better chance to flourish through medicines or shots, what's the big deal?
Was the mother to have a child, this woman was
if you understand, the mother needs to make a long treatment
Yes.
and 4 years of treatment to have a child.
For the time being, it's not comfortable for the woman because usually you have one mature egg every month, every about 28 days. So you have to have shots of hormones in order to produce more eggs that can be retrieved and then fertilized. This treatment is not comfortable and no one is forced to go through this treatment. But now too, maybe I'm being rather too optimistic, there is also the possibility through gene editing of changing this picture in the future. But for the time being, it's true. It can be painful for the woman to undergo this process. But as far as I know, delivery itself is not, no one does it for fun. can be also painful, but then there is also anesthetics. I do not see here an objection of principle to be considered. Simple, I mean, just because this can be uncomfortable for the woman who decides to go through the treatment in order to have a child that she would not otherwise be able to have. I do not think it's a reason to discard the procedure as immoral, if that was the point you had in mind.
Any question? We have 5 minutes sorry? We have 5 minutes or another question? Yeah, we have. There are other questions? There are another one. Okay, so the last question, I would say. The last question? Okay.
Just a clarification. You talk about reproductive rights, and you almost always talk about rights of women. So do you understand reproductive rights as women's rights? Because I would like to know how far you want to go. So let's say that two men, homosexuals, would like to have a child. And I know you said that, for example, in Brazil it's prohibited to get some money. So let's imagine that one of sisters of the homosexual would be willing to give birth. So it would be also a reproductive right of men, right? Correct? Because you didn't talk about it, so I would like to know what you think that there can be surrogate mothers, let's say for homosexual couples or for single men who, you know, have no woman. So if a man would like to have a child, you think that he separately as an individual person without any partner has a reproductive right to have children, to pay or to arrange surrogate mother. This is just a clarification question. I don't want to push you somewhere by my question.
Okay, thank you for the question. I did emphasize how these rights, reproductive rights, are important to women, but by no means I wanted to restrict reproductive rights as a right only to women. Quite on the opposite. Very often, when a couple go to a fertility clinic, blame the man. The sperms are not good. I mean, sperms can be very lazy, they don't swim very fast, so you have to push them in a petri dish. Sometimes sperms have a tendency to swim in cycles, they get lost. What's the point of swimming in cycles? Sometimes they are not in good shape, they are ill-formed. From the genetic point of view, they are all right. There is no problem with them, but they are too lazy, they get tired, they don't get there, or they are not produced in a sufficient number to realistically to fertilize the egg. So in a petri dish, in a controlled environment, you can just push the sperm to the right place, and but very often it's on the side of the man who it's the man who cannot fertilize the egg. And for this reason, I think it's also an important right for a man who wants to found a family, but for no fault of his own, his sperms are lazy or can't swim properly, etc. So it's not only women's right, it's a man's right too.
But can a single man say,
I asked those single men or homosexual couples without women.
One promise for the future would be the use of pluripotent stem cells. It has been done with mice last year. You use cells from the skin to produce pluripotent cells, and then use these cells to produce eggs or sperms, as you like. So a man could use this technology in the future if it is further developed, unregulated, to produce eggs. And his partner might give his sperm to produce, to fertilize his egg in a petri dish, and they will have a baby genetically related to them. What is very bizarre, but not impossible, would be a man having a child with himself. That is one small sample of skin for the production of egg. He's got as much sperm as he wants. Nature has not been very kind, not equal, and he could in principle use his sperm to produce his egg. That wouldn't be a clone, but that would still be very bizarre. And whether or not that would count as a family, and whether or not that should be regulated in the future, that's a different question. But it's open to everyone, I mean, not only for women, but to men. But I think it's rather far away in the future, but it's not impossible. It's been done with mice.
Thank you very much, Professor. We will close here the session. There is a break coffee, 10 minutes, 15?
No.
No?
Till 11.
Come back at 11.